So, a lot of people hate Star Wars The Last Jedi, and I didn't. And since nitpicking CinemaSins type criticism is popular, a lot of people's nitpicks are seen as plot holes when they really aren't. So I'll attempt to explain that all of The Last Jedi's plot holes aren't actually plot holes like previously stated. If you have any additional plot holes, comment them below and I'll address them in another one of these. Spoilers for The Last Jedi, obviously. Why do the bombs fall in space? By far the dumbest one I've seen. Apparently, this film having bombs fall in space is against real-world physics, so that means that this movie about space wizards is bad, even though we've had bombs fall in space in this franchise in previous films, but whatever. According to the wiki, the BSF-17 heavy bomber drops the bombs through sequenced electromagnetic plates in the clip, which propel the bombs to drop in microgravity environments. The bombs would then be drawn magnetically to their targets. And if that wasn't enough of an explanation, we already know that there is artificial gravity on the bomber because Paige Tico has the controller fall off of the ladder, so there would be propulsion to the bombs. Next. Why isn't Luke the same Luke that he was in Return of the Jedi? This one is also really dumb because it assumes that people stay the same all the time. This plot hole came up because people were unhappy with Luke's portrayal as a broken and flawed man and not as the Jedi Master that the EU shows him to become. And well, I'm sorry that it didn't live up to your expectations. Luke had 30 years since Jedi to change and become flawed and broken. People change over time. Hell, Luke had an arc in this 2.5-hour movie where he changed for the better. Why couldn't he have changed over 30 years? Why does the Resistance have a copy of the map if Luke went to Ahch-To to die? This one can be chalked down to the fact that Rian Johnson wrote a different movie than J.J. Abrams, but also can be explained. Luke says that Ahch-To is the most unfindable place in the galaxy, and since there's no internet in the Star Wars universe, it's safe to say that he'd need directions to the most unfindable place in the galaxy. Which is weird because it would have had to been found before in order for it to be deemed unfindable, but nonetheless he would need a map, and he might have gotten the map from Sorlan Tekka, the same person who gave the map to Poe. Another explanation is that everyone thought that he went to the first Jedi Temple, which he did. So they might have been searching for a map for the first Jedi Temple where Luke might be, and lo and behold, Luke is actually there. Why can shields only block lasers and not the TIE fighters? Star Wars shields have been a little bit inconsistent, some being only penetrable by lasers and some being impenetrable altogether. Since we've seen this shield technology that only stops lasers before on the Battle of Naboo, it's unreasonable to consider this a plot hole. You might say, oh well, it's been 60 years since the Battle of Naboo, they could have had better technology that stops both, but keep in mind that the Resistance isn't well funded, and they kind of have to put stuff together from scraps, so that means that they don't have top-of-the-line supplies. Why didn't HOLDO tell Poe the plan? Poe previously got a whole bunch of Resistance soldiers killed during the battle with the Dreadnought, so Leia demoted him. Then HOLDO gets put into power. Is she going to trust the hotshot flyboy that got a bunch of people killed and just got demoted with a need-to-know plan? No. Why was her plan need-to-know? Well, in case it got in the hands of the First Order, like it did, which led to the death of most of the Resistance. Why does the First Order wait until the Raddus is out of fuel? Couldn't they use the TIE fighters and keep attacking them, or have the Star Destroyers warp around and catch them? Because General Hux doesn't like to take chances. He wants them to be completely helpless because he has some weird obsession with becoming the best in Snoke's eyes. If the Raddus is completely out of fuel, the Resistance is helpless. And they couldn't keep attacking them with the TIE fighters because that would be a waste of resources and men. Waiting for the Raddus to run out of fuel ensures that the First Order gets to keep all of their soldiers and fighters, and the Resistance is helpless. They also couldn't have their Star Destroyers warp around if they wanted to keep their big, expensive Star Destroyers safe. They have to calculate a safe lane of hyperspace travel, which is usually pre-mapped around the Resistance so they could trap them, and since they are in an almost uncharted Outer Rim territory, it would take a lot of time to calculate that jump. And since that plan is complicated and time-consuming, the best option is to wait for the Raddus to run out of fuel. Why does Poe know Maz? Because he probably knows her from before The Force Awakens like Han does. Why do the Stormtroopers and Phasma go from nearly executing Finn and Rose to all the way across the hangar after the hyperspace scene? It's inferred that the reason that Finn and Rose aren't killed like they were immediately going to be is because of the force of the Raddus ripping through the Supremacy that shook the ship so much that they flew back, allowing for Finn and Rose to be alive. It is convenient to have this cool shot of Phasma and the troopers all the way from across the hangar, but it isn't completely out of left field. Why can Force Ghosts interact with the physical world now? And why can they summon lightning? Force Ghosts have always been previously shown just standing around, not really touching or moving things, so Yoda bonking Luke in the head isn't against the properties of Force Ghosts, it's just something that hasn't been seen before. It also makes sense. Since Force ghosts stay ground level, that means they do interact with the real world in a way. Obi-Wan's even sits on a log in Empire. Yoda summoning lightning is a bit weird, but they are next to the first Jedi temple, which could very well amplify the Force, allowing for a Force ghost to use it. Why is the Force projection of Han's playing dice tangible? That is due to Force projections being able to rest on a surface, since Luke's projection stays ground level. So it also makes sense that the dice can stay in Leia's and Kylo's hand. Why did Rey get back on the Falcon after stealing Snoke's personal ship? Because she could help out Chewbacca and also the Resistance on Crate. Why wasn't the HOLDO maneuver done with the 2 other Resistance ships that got destroyed? Why didn't she do it earlier? Why didn't she set it on a timer and escape? The First Order had their guns trained on the transport ships and not the Raddus, so they couldn't stop it in time. The 2 other Resistance ships were destroyed seconds after entering the optimal firing range of the Supremacy, so there would be no time to turn around and engage the hyperdrive. Hux even says later that the Raddus engaging the hyperdrive was a distraction, allowing time for HOLDO to actually go into hyperspace and destroy the ship. She didn't set it on a timer and escape because the pilot needs to go down with the ship, and we don't know how complicated of a maneuver it is to pull off. Why hasn't the HOLDO maneuver been used before in the Star Wars saga? A lot of people are asking why a lightspeed kamikaze hasn't been utilized before, and that's most likely due to the fact that it's been 30 years since the original trilogy and that the technology has changed. Not only that, but it wouldn't work on both Death Star battles and the Starkiller Base battle due to the size of the Death Stars and Starkiller Base. Yeah, the Supremacy is big, but it isn't that big. It's also a relatively flat ship, which is better for being split in half than either Death Star. It's also due to the size of the ship that's hitting it. The Raddus is a relatively large ship, larger than the other 2 Resistance ships, so the Raddus would do more damage than the other 2, especially on a flat ship like the Supremacy. The wiki says, hyperdrive allows starships to travel faster than the speed of light, crossing space through an alternate dimension of hyperspace. Large objects in normal space cast mass shadows in hyperspace, so hyperspace jumps must be precisely calculated to avoid collisions. And when a ship going lightspeed gets near a mass shadow, it drops out of hyperspace in order to avoid a collision. Now, since the collision only happens between the ship and the mass shadow in hyperspace, it would be inferred that no actual damage happens to the object causing the mass shadow during the collision. In this case, the Raddus only gets destroyed, but the Supremacy remains intact. Now, ships entering hyperspace go to significant speed before entering, and since ships in hyperspace go faster than lightspeed, we can safely assume that the short time between the 2 points has the ship accelerating to lightspeed into hyperspace, and a collision between the start of the jump and actually entering hyperspace would cause significant damage. So in this scenario, the Supremacy is right between the space between the start of the jump and the point of entry. The point of entry could even be in the Supremacy, but since the Raddus got destroyed before it could enter hyperspace, it crashes into the Supremacy at light speed, the debris also going light speed, destroying the fleet behind it. Now, it would take time to calculate that, so in another scenario, let's assume this. Since the Supremacy can track ships throughout hyperspace, and hyperspace is an alternate dimension, the hyperspace tracker not only exists in normal space, but in hyperspace as well. So when the Raddus crashes into the tracker in hyperspace, it also gets destroyed in normal space, faster than light speed. Regardless, there are many factors which led to this maneuver being pulled off successfully, so it being pulled off again would need these kind of conditions, skill, and luck. So these are my explanations for the plot holes I've seen people complaining about. Let me know if I missed any. From what I've seen, The Last Jedi doesn't really have any real plot holes, so saying this film is bad because of obvious plot holes is a preposterous claim. The Last Jedi is great and an overall well-done film with incredible attention to detail, and these criticisms aren't legitimate criticisms. They're nitpicks, complaints. We should look at films in a different way and not perpetuate nitpicking, pessimistic film complaints. Instead, we should focus on what the film got right, and in the case of The Last Jedi, it got pretty much the whole thing right. Thank you.